The box was on the third shelf from the bottom, behind a stack of her good dishes that Eleanor had not used in 20 years and a bag of fabric scraps she had been meaning to turn into something since 1987. It was not labeled. Nothing in Eleanor's storage room was labeled. She had been a woman who knew where everything was and had not anticipated a time when she would not be the one looking for it. I almost did not open it. It was a Saturday in March, and I had been in the storage room for 3 hours, and I was tired in the specific way of someone who has been making decisions about objects all day: keep, donate, discard. And my threshold for one more decision was low. The box was cardboard, sealed with packing tape that had gone brittle with age, and it had the look of a box that had been there for a long time and had not been disturbed. I almost put it in the donate pile without opening it. I almost did. I opened it because Eleanor had been meticulous about her things, and I did not want to donate something that turned out to matter. I cut the tape with my keys and lifted the lid. Inside, 48 envelopes. All sealed, all addressed to me. In my father's handwriting. I sat down on the floor of Eleanor's storage room with the box in my lap, and I looked at the envelopes for a long time. My father had been dead for 28 years. He had died when I was 8 years old of a heart attack in the spring of my second grade year. I had 48 letters from him. They were addressed to me. I had never received them. I want to tell you the rest. But first, I need to take you back to what I believed for 28 years. Because what I believed and what the letters told me are two very different things, and the distance between them is the whole story. Welcome back to Still Standing Stories, where the women who are given the wrong map finally find the right one. If you have ever built your understanding of yourself on a story that turned out to be incomplete, this story is for you. Subscribe before we go further, because what was in those 48 envelopes changed everything I thought I knew about my father and about myself. And I want you to hear all of it. My name is Diana Reeves. I'm 36 years old, and I'm a librarian at the Charleston County Public Library in South Carolina. I work with books and with the people who need them, which is everyone, in different ways, and at different moments. I believe in the specific power of a story to tell you something true about your own life by telling you about someone else's. I have believed this since I was a child, since books were the place I went when the story of my own family was too complicated to sit inside. The story of my family, as I understood it for 28 years, was this. My father James left when I was 8, not died, left. This is what my mother Carol told me in the specific language of a woman managing a situation for which she did not have adequate language. She said, "Your father is gone." She said, "He won't be coming back," she said. When I was older and asked more directly, he chose to leave. That's what he did. She said it with the specific flatness of a person who has made peace with a thing by refusing to feel it, and I received it the way children receive the stories their parents tell them about important things, as truth, as the account of record, as the map I would use to navigate everything that came after. I navigated with that map for 28 years. The map said, "Your father left. Your father chose to go. Your father was someone who could be in the world where you were, and chose to be elsewhere." The map said, "You were 8 years old, and someone who was supposed to stay chose not to." I built on that map. Not consciously. No one builds consciously on the stories their parents tell them about themselves. You build the way all foundational building happens, which is before you know you're building, when the material is going in and you do not yet have the tools to evaluate its quality. By the time I had the tools, the building was 20 years old and load-bearing. The load it bore was specific. A particular cautiousness in relationships. The specific kind that belongs to someone who has internalized the lesson that people who are supposed to stay sometimes don't. A tendency to hold people at a slight distance until I was certain they would remain, not unfriendliness. I am genuinely warm, but a watchfulness underneath the warmth. A recurring sense in the quiet moments of my adult life, of something unresolved, something I could not name, but that lived in the space where a father was supposed to be and wasn't. I did not know the space was wrong. I thought the space was accurate. I thought the space was shaped exactly like the truth of what had happened, which was, he left, he had not left. He had been writing to me for 4 years. Stay with me, because I need to tell you about Eleanor. Before I tell you about the letters, I want to tell you about being 8 years old, and what I understood about my father's absence, because the 8-year-old version of understanding is important and different from the adult version, and I want to honor it rather than pass over it. At 8 years old, the information your father is gone and won't be coming back is received differently than it is at 30. At 30, you have the cognitive architecture to ask questions. Gone where? Why? What does that mean about me? At 8, you have the information and you have your body's response to it. And the body's response at 8 is not analytical. It is physical. It is the specific weight that settles in the chest when something important is removed. I felt that weight. I felt it in the weeks after my mother told me he was gone, and I felt it in the months that followed, and I felt it in the years. Carried forward in that particular way of early losses. Not always conscious, not always named, but present. The weight of the absent father, the weight of the story that said he chose. I was a quiet child, not unhappy. I want to be accurate about this. I had friends, and I had books, and I had Eleanor in the summers, and I had a mother who, for all the complicated things I understand about her now, loved me and provided for me and was there. I was not unhappy, but I was quiet in the specific way of children who are holding something they have not been given language for, and who have chosen, in the absence of language, to hold it silently. I read a great deal. This is where I became a librarian, not in any dramatic or sudden way, just in the accumulation of years of books being the place where the holding was easier. Books are the place where complicated things are given language. Someone else has done the work of naming the unnamed thing. And you find it in a sentence on a page and you think, yes, that is what this is. Books gave me language for the holding, and the language made the holding lighter, and the lightness made reading the thing I went back to for the rest of my life, and the thing I eventually made my life's work. My father had been a reader too. This is in the letters. He mentions specific books, asks in one letter whether I had read The Phantom Tollbooth, which I had not then and have since read 4 times. He mentions a habit of reading in the evenings in the chair by the window of the apartment. He mentions Scout preferring to be in the chair with him, occupying most of it, which required them to work out a territorial agreement that Scout, by all accounts, considered fully settled in Scout's favor. I read in the evenings too, in the chair by the window of my apartment. I do not have a dog. But I read in the evenings, and I had not known until the letters that I was doing what he did, that the habit had a parent, that the thing I thought was entirely mine had roots I had not known about. The roots do not make it less mine, they make it more. They make it a thing that was passed from him to me through whatever combination of genetics and early memory and the 8 years of being in the same household before he left, before the marriage ended, before the letters began. The reading came from him and became mine and is still mine, and knowing its origin changes something about how I hold it. I read differently now. Not better. I was already a good reader. It is my profession. But differently, with the knowledge that the habit is a form of inheritance. He passed it to me. I will keep it. Because Eleanor is the reason the letters existed, and the reason they were in that box on the 3rd shelf, and the reason I found them at all. Eleanor Reeves was my father's mother. She was 89 when she died in February of this year, which means she lived for 28 years after her son did not, which is the specific grief of parents who outlive their children, and which is its own category of loss that I understood better after I read the letters than I had before. She was small and precise, and had opinions about everything, delivered in the direct way of a woman who has been alive long enough to know that indirection is expensive. She loved me in the uncomplicated way of a grandmother, whose love is not filtered through the complications of adult relationships. She loved me because I was James's daughter, and because I was myself, and the 2 things together were sufficient. She visited every summer. Not long visits, a week, sometimes 2, the specific rhythm of a grandmother who respected the household she was visiting and did not overstay. She brought me books, always. She was the person who taught me, by example rather than instruction, that books were the correct response to almost any situation. We sat on the porch in the summer evenings, and she read, and I read, and we did not need to talk, which is a gift that not everyone knows how to give. She never talked about my father in front of my mother. I understood this as delicacy, as the grandmother navigating the complicated territory of the dead son and the living daughter-in-law, who had said he left and who was raising his child, and who occupied a position that required careful handling. Eleanor was careful. She was always careful. I understood her carefulness as tact. I understand it differently now. She was in her last months when I visited for the final time. She was in a care facility by then, a good one, with people who knew her and treated her with the specific respect that a person who has been alive 89 years, and who knows exactly what she thinks deserves. She held my hand on that last visit and she looked at me for a long time and she said, "Diana, you look like him." I said, "People say that." She said, "It's true, the eyes especially. He had your eyes." She said it with something in her voice that was not quite grief and not quite peace, but something between, the something between that comes from having held a loss for a very long time. She said, "When I'm gone, go through my things carefully, all of it. Don't miss anything." I said, "Of course, Eleanor." She said, "I mean it carefully." I said, "I will." She looked at me for another moment, then she looked out the window. "He loved you," she said. "He loved you very much." I said, "I know, but I said it the way you say things you're supposed to know and have been told are true and that you hold as facts without knowing them in the body. As information, not as knowledge. She died in February. I drove from Charleston on a Saturday in March to go through her things, and I went through them carefully, and I found the box. I sat on the floor of the storage room for I do not know how long. Long enough that the afternoon light through the small window shifted. I did not open the envelopes. I counted them first, 48. All addressed in the same handwriting. The cramped, careful print of a person who has not written by hand often and is concentrating. All addressed to Diana. All sealed. I carried the box to Eleanor's kitchen table. I made tea, because making tea is something to do with your hands, when your hands need something to do. I sat at the table, I looked at the box. Then I took the first envelope from the top. The postmark was from the spring when I was 8 years old. The month after he died, except he had not died then, not yet. He had died in May, and this letter was dated March and postmarked from Charleston and addressed to me at an address I recognized as my grandmother's, not my mother's. He had been sending the letters to Eleanor. I opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, written on yellow legal pad paper in blue ink, in the cramped, careful print from the envelope. The handwriting of a man who was concentrating. The handwriting of a man I had never seen write anything. Because I was 8 when he died, and 8-year-olds do not pay attention to handwriting, and I was looking at it now for the first time at 36, and it was the most real thing in the room. "Dear Diana," it began. "I don't know if you'll ever read this. Your mother and I have decided it's better if I keep some distance for a while, and I don't want to confuse you or make things harder. But I can't not write to you. So I'm writing and I'm giving the letters to Mom to keep, and maybe someday she'll give them to you, or maybe you'll find them yourself. Either way, I wanted there to be a record. I wanted you to be able to know, whenever you were ready, that I was here, that I was thinking about you, that I love you." I put the letter down. I picked up my tea. I looked out Eleanor's kitchen window at the yard where she had grown a garden every summer for 40 years. The garden that was overgrown now and brown with March, and that would not be tended this spring for the first time in 40 years. He had not left. He had been writing to me. Eleanor had been keeping the letters. I want to tell you about the reading, because I read all 48 letters that Saturday, and the reading was its own experience that I want to describe precisely. The letters were in order. Eleanor had kept them in order. Because Eleanor kept everything in order, which is one of the reasons I trust that what I found in that box was complete and not partial. 48 months of letters, from March of the year I was 8 to June of the year I was 12. He died in May of that year. The last letter was from February, 3 months before he died. He wrote about his life. Not dramatically. He was not a dramatic person, or he did not write dramatically, which is not the same thing. He wrote the ordinary things, the things a father would tell a daughter if he were telling her about his days. He had moved to an apartment on the north side of the city. He had gotten a dog, a brown terrier he named Scout, who was by all accounts in the letters, the most opinionated animal he had ever encountered. He was working as a carpenter, which I had not known, My mother had never told me what he did, and I had not known to ask when I was 8 and had never thought to look it up. He wrote about me. This was the part that cost me the most to read, the part where he told me what he remembered, and what he wondered and what he hoped. He remembered that I had loved the color purple at 7, and wondered if I still did. He remembered a specific afternoon when we had gone to the beach, and I had collected shells for 3 hours with the patience of a scientist, and he had sat in a chair and watched me and thought, "She is going to be someone extraordinary." He wondered if I was reading. He had been a reader himself, and he hoped I was. He hoped I was happy. He hoped my mother was okay. He wrote these hopes in the specific way of a person who is hoping without knowing, who is sending wishes into a space where he cannot see whether they land. He wrote in the 4th letter, something that I have read 20 times since and that I want to read to you now. He wrote, "I think about you every day. Not in a sad way, or not only in a sad way, I think about you the way you think about the best thing in your life. With gratitude, I guess? And something that doesn't have a word. You are the best thing in my life, Diana. That hasn't changed. I don't think it can change." I read that letter, and I put it face down on Eleanor's kitchen table, and I pressed my hands flat on the surface, and I breathed. The breathing was necessary. The table was necessary, having something solid to press my hands against. I breathed for a while, and then I picked the letter back up and I kept reading. The last letter was dated February. He died in May. He did not know, when he wrote it, that there would not be more. He wrote as a person who intends to continue. There is a reference to spring, to what they might plant in the garden, to Scout's ongoing opinions about squirrels. He wrote, "I'll write again next month. I always do." He signed it the way he signed all of them. Love, Dad, love, Dad. The last 2 words he ever wrote to me. Love, Dad. I sat in Eleanor's kitchen until it was dark. The tea went cold. I did not make more. I sat with the 48 letters in the box, and the last letter in my hand, and the specific weight of what I had just learned, which was not a simple thing and which I am still learning the full dimensions of. What I had learned was this: my father had not left me. He had been written out of my life by a decision that was not mine, and that was not his. And he had responded to that writing out by writing, by putting words on yellow legal paper in blue ink every month for 4 years, and giving them to his mother to keep, and hoping that someday I would find them, or that someday Eleanor would give them to me. And neither of those things had happened until I was 36 and Eleanor was dead and the box was on the 3rd shelf behind the dishes. I want to tell you about my mother because she is the person who kept the letters from me, and because I have to tell you what I understand about that. Before I tell you what I did with the understanding, Carol Reeves is 64 years old. She is a practical woman who has spent her adult life managing the household, managing the absence of a husband, managing the raising of a daughter on a single income, and the specific pride of a person who does this without asking for more than she needs. She is not a bad person. I want to say this clearly before anything else. She is not a bad person. She is a person who was 28 years old when her marriage ended and 36 when her ex-husband died, and who had, in the 8 years between those 2 events, built a story that allowed her to continue functioning. The story was, he left. The story was protective. The story kept the specific grief of a marriage ending at a manageable distance by converting it into something that had an actor and an action. He chose, he left, he did that. The story gave her somewhere to put the loss. I understand this. I have spent 8 months, the months between the box in March and today, understanding it. Understanding does not require me to say the story was right, or that what it cost me was acceptable, or that the 28 years of building on a faulty map were fine. They were not fine. But I understand how the story was built, and why it was maintained, and what it would have cost her to revise it, which would have required her to say, "I was wrong, I told you something that was not true, and I was wrong for 28 years. That revision requires a particular kind of courage that I am not sure my mother has. I do not know if I would have it in her position. I am trying to hold this honestly. I drove home from Eleanor's house on that Saturday in March, with the box of letters in the back seat. I drove the 2 hours from Eleanor's town to Charleston without music, which I never do. I always have music in the car. I needed the quiet. The quiet was the only container large enough for what I was carrying. I went to my apartment. I put the box on my kitchen table. I sat down. I called my closest friend, a woman named Patricia, who has known me for 12 years and who understands the architecture of my family well enough to understand what I was going to tell her without needing the full context for every piece. I told her what I had found. She listened without interrupting, which is her best quality and the reason I called her. When I finished, she said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Do you want me to come over?" I said, "Yes." She came. Patricia and I sat at my kitchen table, and she read some of the letters while I made dinner. Not all of them. I was not ready to share all of them, but some. She read quietly and I cooked quietly, and at some point she put a letter down and looked at me and said, "Diana, he loved you so much." I said, "I know." And this time I said it differently than I had said it to Eleanor. This time I said it knowing in the body what it meant. Not as information, as knowledge. He loved me. He had always loved me. He had been writing to me from an apartment on the north side of the city with a terrier named Scout, writing on yellow legal paper with a blue pen, writing every month because he could not write, because not writing would have meant accepting that I was simply gone from his life, and he could not accept that. He could not accept that I was gone. I spent 28 years believing he had chosen to go. I want to tell you about the specific experience of reading the letters, because I described it briefly, and the reading deserves more. I read them in order. This was instinct. I am a librarian. Order is my native language, but it was also the only way I could have read them. The letters are a story. Not a dramatic story, not a story with a plot in the conventional sense. They are a story in the way that any sustained account of a life is a story. You see the person change over time, accumulate, respond to things, become something you would not have fully predicted from the first letter. The first letters are the most careful. He is writing to a daughter he has not seen, writing toward a relationship that is being maintained entirely in this form because this is the only form available, and there is a quality in the early letters of someone who is not sure of his footing, not uncertain of the love that is always clear, present in every paragraph, but uncertain of how to do this specific thing, which is to be a father through letters to a child who may not read them for years. He finds his footing by the fifth letter. Something loosens, the sentences become longer, less careful, more like speaking. He starts telling stories about Scout with the easy humor of a person who has stopped worrying about how the story will be received. He describes a disastrous attempt to cook something he had seen on a cooking show that resulted in what he calls a substance that was technically food in the sense that it contained calories. I laughed at this in Eleanor's kitchen alone at 36, reading a letter written when I was 9, and the laughing felt like meeting him. Not the father of the photographs or the father of my mother's story, the actual person, the one who burned things trying to follow cooking shows and thought it was funny. By the 10th letter, he is talking to me differently than he was in the first. He is assuming I know things now. He references earlier letters, says things like, "You remember, I mentioned Scout squirrel situation," as though I have been reading along, as though this is a correspondence rather than a unilateral sending. He was writing as though I was writing back. He was writing into the relationship he wanted to have, and the wanting was so clear in every sentence that I had to stop and breathe between letters more than once. I stopped most at the letter from the October when I was 10. I want to tell you about the 48th letter specifically, because the last letter deserves its own space. He wrote it in February. He was 41 years old. He would be dead in May and did not know it, which means the letter has the quality that only last things have in retrospect, the quality of a person fully alive, making ordinary plans using the future tense without irony, because the future was available. He mentioned spring. He mentioned the garden his mother was planning, the seeds she had started indoors, the particular ambition of Eleanor's seed catalogs, which he described as reading more like conquest documents than gardening guides. He mentioned Scout's birthday, the dog's second birthday, and the undignified nature of celebrating a dog's birthday with a special treat and candles, which he had done anyway because Scout deserved it, and because some dignities are worth sacrificing. He wrote about me, as he always did, in every letter, with a specific quality of attention that does not diminish over time. He wrote, "I've been thinking about what you must be like now. You'd be 12. I try to imagine 12 and I keep thinking about what I was like at 12, which wasn't what I'd want to project onto you. I was not a particularly distinguished 12-year-old. But I think you're probably more interesting than I was. I have a feeling about you, Diana. I have always had a feeling about you. Something specific and good. Something specific and good. He had a feeling about me. A daughter he had not seen in 4 years, had not spoken to, had only watched from a distance at a fall festival, and he had a feeling about her that was something specific and good. I'm 36. I have spent 36 years not knowing that someone who loved me had this specific good feeling about me, had been writing it down every month, had sent 48 letters to a box in a storage room because sending them somewhere was better than sending them nowhere. The last line of the last letter, I'll write again next month. I always do. Love, Dad. He always did, until May. Until a heart that had been working hard for 41 years stopped working the way hearts sometimes stop, without warning, without the courtesy of a last letter. He did not get to write next month. I did not get to read it. This is the grief that has no container and that I'm learning to hold without one, the grief of the letter that was never written, the month that did not come, the years of letters that would have followed if May had not happened. The feeling he had about me, something specific and good, that he would have kept telling me in his blue ink on yellow paper every month if he had had more months. I grieve that he did not have more months. I grieve the letters I will never read. I grieve at 36 the way I could not grieve at 8, which is fully with all the tools that 36 years have given me for this specific work. I also hold what I have. 48 letters. 4 years of his voice. The fall festival and scout and the cooking show disaster and the garden seeds and something specific and good. I have this. It exists. It is on the shelf in the archival box in the proper sleeves. And I can read it whenever I need to. And I need to sometimes. And I do. He had seen me, he said. Not spoken to me, I do not think he was supposed to. Or he had decided not to for reasons the letter gestures at without explaining. But he had been somewhere I was. A fall festival, he thinks. He saw me from a distance, and he had watched me for a few minutes before he made himself leave. He wrote, "You were laughing at something, I couldn't hear what. But I could see your face, you looked happy." I stood there longer than I should have, and then I walked away, and when I got to my car, I sat there for a while. I just needed to know you were okay. You looked okay. You looked more than okay. I read that paragraph 4 times. He had seen me at a fall festival and watched me laugh and gone back to his car and sat there. He had needed to know I was okay. He had looked and found me laughing. He had driven home with that. I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and I held the letter, and I thought about every fall festival of my childhood, trying to remember which one. I could not remember the specific one, but I remembered fall festivals in general, the smell of apple cider and hay, the specific golden quality of fall light in South Carolina, the way children run between the booths and adults watch them run. I was there at one of them, laughing, and my father was there too, watching, and I did not know. He was there. He was watching. He went home and sat in his car. I held the letter for a long time. Then I put it in the sleeve and went to the next one. The blue pen is the thing I keep coming back to. Every letter in blue ink, I have used blue pens my whole life. Not consciously, not as a choice I could explain, just a preference that arrived before I had reasons for preferences, and that has stayed. I had not known he wrote in blue. I know now that I write in blue because somewhere in my 8-year-old body there is a memory of watching him write, of the specific color of the ink, and that memory became a preference that became a habit, that became the thing I carried forward without knowing what I was carrying. I carry him in the blue ink. I have been carrying him for 28 years without knowing it. I called my mother 2 weeks after the box. I had spent 2 weeks with the letters and with Patricia and with my own thoughts, which were large and various, and required the 2 weeks to settle into something I could bring to a phone call. I did not rehearse what I would say. Rehearsing felt like the wrong approach, too controlled, too shaped, for something that needed to be real. She answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something I found at Eleanor's." A pause. A specific pause, the pause of a person who has been waiting for something and is not sure they are ready for it to arrive. Then, okay. I told her about the box. I told her about the 48 letters. I told her about Eleanor's last words to me. The go through my things carefully. The careful emphasis on carefully. I told her about reading them in Eleanor's kitchen until it was dark. I told her what the letters said. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call had not dropped. Then she said, "I didn't know Eleanor had kept them." I said, "Did you know they existed?" Another pause. "He told me he was writing. I told him not to send them to you directly. I thought you needed stability. I thought letters from him would confuse things." I said, "He sent them to Eleanor." She said, "I know. She told me she would keep them. I didn't know she'd kept them all this time." She said this with something in her voice that I could not fully read, not guilt exactly. Or not only guilt, something more complicated. The sound of a person encountering the consequences of a decision they had made a long time ago and thought was behind them. I said, "Mom, he didn't leave." "That's what I grew up believing, and it wasn't true." She was quiet again. Then she said, "He left the marriage, Diana. He and we couldn't." I said, "I know. I'm not talking about the marriage. I'm talking about me. You told me he left me. He didn't leave me. He was writing to me every month for 4 years." She said, "I was trying to protect you." I said, "I know." And I meant it. I did know, the way I knew about the story she had built and why she had built it, and what it had cost her to maintain it. I knew. But I also said, it was the wrong kind of protection. She cried. My mother, who is not a crier, who manages things rather than feels them, cried. I heard it through the phone, quiet, contained, the crying of a person who does not want to be heard crying. I sat with it. I did not tell her it was okay, because it was not okay, and I will not say things that are not true, just to make a moment easier. But I also did not pour the full weight of 28 years of the wrong map into the phone call. Because she is 64 years old and she is my mother, and there is a difference between truth and cruelty. We talked for an hour. We did not resolve everything. Some things do not resolve in one conversation, but we said true things to each other, which we have not always done. And the saying of them is its own kind of beginning. Eleanor knew. This is the thing I keep returning to. The thing I have sat with for 8 months. Eleanor knew the letters existed. She kept them for 28 years, through my father's death and through my childhood visits and through the summers on the porch with books and through her last years in the care facility. She kept them, and she did not give them to me, and she did not tell me about them, and she waited until she was dying to tell me to go through her things carefully. I have thought about why. I have thought about it from many angles, and I have not arrived at a single answer because I do not think there is one. Eleanor was navigating the complicated territory of a dead son and a living daughter-in-law and a granddaughter who was being raised inside a story that Eleanor knew was incomplete. She could have given me the letters at any point. She could have told me the truth at any point. She did not. And in her last days, she did the closest thing available to telling me. She told me to look carefully, with the specific emphasis of a woman who knew what careful looking would find. I forgive her. This surprises me sometimes, how straightforwardly I forgive her. But Eleanor was 89 and she had held this for 28 years, and in the end she arranged what she could arrange, the box, the emphasis, the careful, and I found it. She gave me what she could give me in the form she could give it. I will take it. The letters are in a box on my bookshelf now. Not the storage room box, I bought a proper one, archival quality. The kind librarians use for important documents. Each letter is in its own sleeve. They are organized chronologically, which is the only way I know how to organize things. I have read them all multiple times. I have some of them memorized. Not deliberately, just from reading. The one about the beach and the shells. The one about Scout and the squirrels. The one that says, "You are the best thing in my life, Diana." The last one which ends, "I'll write again next month, I always do. Love, Dad. I always do." He always did. Until he couldn't anymore. There is a blue pen on my desk at work, and a blue pen on my nightstand, and a blue pen in the bag I carry everywhere. This has been true my whole adult life, and I understand it now in a way I did not before March. I am carrying him forward in the only way available to me, which is the way his presence found its way into my body before I knew I was holding it, and which is the way he will continue to be present, in the ink, in the letters, in the particular way I sit with important things and give them the time they require. He gave the letters time. Every month for 4 years he sat with a yellow legal pad and a blue pen, and he wrote to me knowing the letters might never reach me. Writing anyway. The writing was the act of love available to him, and he performed it faithfully and completely. Love, Dad? The last 2 words, I'm going to carry them for the rest of my life. Not as grief, or not only as grief, as knowledge. As the thing I know now in the body, the way you know things that live below language and above memory, the way you know your own handwriting or the color of your preferred pen. He loved me. He always did. He always will. I want to tell you about what I have done since March, because 8 months have passed and the 8 months are not a footnote. The first thing I did was tell Patricia. I have told you this already. Patricia is the first call, and she came over and read the letters while I cooked and said, "He loved you so much." This is the foundation of the 8 months. Having it said by someone who was there, reading it in real time from outside my own head. The second thing I did was find a therapist. I had been in therapy before, briefly, in my late 20s. For reasons unrelated to this or related, I understand now, in the underground way that the wrong map produces symptoms whose cause is not immediately visible. The therapist I found this spring is a woman named Dr. Reeves who specializes in family systems and grief, which turned out to be exactly the right combination for what I needed. She said in our 3rd session, "You are grieving 2 things simultaneously. You are grieving the father you lost, which is the grief you should have been able to do at 8 and were given the wrong tools for. And you're grieving the story, the version of events you lived inside for 28 years that turned out to be incomplete." She said, "Both griefs are real. You don't have to do them in order." I said, "How do you do them at the same time?" She said, "The same way you do everything at the same time. Imperfectly, 1 day at a time. I'm doing them imperfectly, 1 day at a time. Some days the grief for him is foremost, the specific grief of a daughter who lost her father at 8 and has now met him in letters at 36 and understands what was lost in the losing. Some days the grief for the story is foremost, the specific grief of realizing that the map you used for 28 years was wrong, which means all the territory you navigated with it needs to be revisited with the right map, which is not simple and is not fast. Some days both griefs are present simultaneously, and the 2 together are larger than I can hold in the usual way, and I go to the library and I sit at my desk and I do the work, because the work holds me when I cannot hold myself. The library is one of the consistent things. It was consistent before March, and it is consistent now. The work of a librarian is the work of connecting people to the information they need, which is sometimes the information they asked for, and sometimes the information they needed without knowing they needed it. I'm good at this. I have always been good at this. I understand now that being good at it is at least partly the inheritance of a father who gave his daughter books, and a grandmother who kept letters, and a mother who built a story with the information available to her, and who has spent 64 years maintaining it. All of these things went into the person who knows how to find what someone needs. I went back to Eleanor's town in June, 3 months after the box. I went to the cemetery. My father is buried there, not Eleanor's cemetery, a different one, but the same town. I had not been to his grave since the funeral, which I remember in the fragmentary way that 8-year-olds remember things. The dark clothes, the number of people, the specific quality of grief in a crowd which is both communal and entirely isolating. I brought one of the letters, the one from October, the Fall Festival letter. I read it out loud at the grave, which is something I have never done before, and which felt, while I was doing it, entirely right, like closing a loop, like returning something to where it belonged. I read, "You were laughing at something, I couldn't hear what. But I could see your face. You looked happy?" I stood at the grave after I finished and I said, "I looked happy because I was happy. And I would have been happier if I had known you were there. But I'm glad you came to see. I'm glad you needed to know." I drove home. I stopped once on the highway to cry. The crying was the kind that comes from deep down and has been building for a long time and needs to go somewhere. I let it go. Then I drove the rest of the way home. He was there at the fall festival. I know this now, and I'm here 36 years later, carrying the knowledge forward in the blue ink and the letters and the evening reading by the window. He found the form available to him and he used it faithfully, every month for 4 years. I'm finding the forms available to me, writing this, telling you, going back to the library on Monday morning and doing the work of connecting people to what they need. Living the life that was formed by a loss I did not fully understand until March and that I'm still learning the full shape of. He loved me. He always did. I know this now in the body, the way I know my own handwriting, the way I know the color of the pen I always reach for. Blue, always blue. Love, Dad. The last 2 words. I carry them. There is something I want to say about libraries, because I have named my work as a librarian several times, and I want to tell you why it matters in this specific story. Libraries are, at their core, about the preservation of things. Not just books, everything. Records, photographs, letters, documents. The things that tell us what happened, and who was there, and what they thought about it. Libraries exist because humans understood, early, that the things that exist on paper can outlast the people who made them, and that the outlasting matters, that the record of a person or an event or an idea has value beyond the moment of its making. My father's letters are a library, a small one, 48 items, all from the same author, all addressed to the same reader. They were preserved by Eleanor in the same spirit that libraries preserve things, not for a specific immediate purpose, but against the possibility of future need. Eleanor did not know when or whether the letters would be useful. She kept them anyway. She kept them carefully. This is the act that libraries perform on behalf of civilization, keeping carefully, against the possibility of future need. My grandmother was doing this work before I chose it as a profession. She was maintaining a collection for a patron who did not yet know she needed it. I have been thinking about what it means that I became a librarian, that the person who was kept from her father's letters chose to spend her professional life ensuring that information reaches the people who need it. I do not know if this is coincidence. I suspect it is not. I suspect that the gap, the specific absence of the letters I should have had and did not, shaped me toward a profession that is about closing gaps. That makes me an agent of the kind of giving that Eleanor ultimately did and that my mother ultimately did not, and that I'm trying, in my professional life and my personal one, to do as fully and as carefully as I can. The letters are on my shelf. I keep them carefully. My mother and I are still talking. Not about the letter specifically. We have said what can be said about that, for now, and the wound is fresh enough that more words would tear rather than help. But we are talking in the general way, in the way that we always have talked about her life and my life and the small ordinary things that families talk about, when they are maintaining the relationship rather than examining it. We are maintaining. It is not nothing. She said in the last call something that I'm still holding. She said, I have a photograph of him, of your father, from when you were about 3, the 2 of you at the beach. I said, I've never seen it. She said, no. I've been thinking, I could send it to you. If you want. I said, yes, I want. She said, okay, I'll send it. The photograph has not arrived yet. I check the mail with a specific attention I do not usually bring to checking the mail. It will arrive. My mother said she would send it, which means she will send it. She is not a person who says she will do something and then does not. She will send it. I will have a photograph of my father and me at the beach, when I was 3, before the leaving, before the letters, before any of this. 2 people on a beach who did not know yet what was coming. A father who would write 48 letters. A daughter who would find them 28 years later in a storage room in March. 2 people on a beach. Something specific and good. I want to tell you about a patron at the library, because something happened 3 weeks ago that I have been thinking about since, and that belongs in this story. She was a woman in her mid-40s, and she came to the reference desk on a Wednesday afternoon with the specific expression of someone who needs something but is not sure how to ask for it. I recognize this expression. It is one of the most common expressions in a library, and learning to read it and to create enough space for the request underneath it is most of the skill of the work. I said, "What can I help you find today?" She said, "I'm not sure exactly. I found some old family documents and I'm trying to understand them. Some of the language is from a long time ago and I'm not sure what some of it means." I said, "We can definitely help with that." "What kind of documents?" She said, "Letters." "Old ones? From my grandfather?" I looked at her. She looked at me. She did not know anything about me. I was simply the librarian at the reference desk on a Wednesday afternoon. She did not know about the box in March or the 48 letters or what the word letters had just done in my chest. I said, "Follow me." I took her to the local history section, where we have resources for historical documents and the specific vocabulary of mid-century correspondence. We sat at a table together, and I helped her read the letters, parsing the formal language of an earlier era, explaining terms that had fallen out of use. The letters were from her grandfather to his brother, during a period of geographic separation in the 1940s. They were full of the ordinary details of a life: weather, work, the small frustrations and pleasures of daily existence, and they were full of love, the kind that does not announce itself but is present in every sentence, in the specific care taken with the telling. She cried a little when we got to a passage where her grandfather described missing his brother. Not dramatically, she pressed her fingers to her eyes and took a breath and said, "Sorry?" I said, "Please don't apologize." She said, "It's just, I never knew him. He died before I was born," and reading this, I feel like She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. I knew what she was going to say. "Like meeting him?" I said, "That's exactly what it is." She looked at me. I said, "Letters are the best record we have of who a person was. Not the public version, the actual one. The one who writes about the weather and misses his brother." She nodded. She looked back at the letters. She said, "I'm glad I found them." I said, "So am I." I meant it both ways. I meant I was glad she had found her grandfather's letters, and I meant I was glad I had found my father's. We sat together for another hour. When she left, she said, "Thank you. This meant a lot." I said it meant something to me too. She looked at me, the look of a person registering that there is a larger statement behind what has just been said. She did not ask what it was. She smiled and she left, and I went back to the reference desk and I sat for a moment before the next patron came. He loved me. She loved her grandfather. The letters exist. The love in them is real and readable and findable if you know where to look and if someone kept them carefully. Eleanor kept them carefully. I keep things carefully. The patron on the Wednesday afternoon will keep hers carefully, I'm sure of it. This is how love survives. In the careful keeping, in the archival boxes and the proper sleeves and the third shelf from the bottom, behind the dishes. In the blue ink on yellow paper, sent somewhere because somewhere was better than nowhere. Held for 28 years against the possibility of future need. The need arrived. The need is always arriving, for someone. The love is there, waiting. The photograph arrived on a Thursday. A week after my mother said she would send it. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope. I have now read enough of my father's handwriting to recognize its shape, the cramped, careful print of a man concentrating, and then I realized it was not his handwriting, it was my mother's, and the recognition I had felt was the similarity between them, which I had not noticed before and which tells me something about why she kept the letters for 28 years without throwing them away. She recognized something in his handwriting that she had never told me she recognized. The photograph is 3 inches by 4 inches, color slightly faded. It shows a beach? I cannot tell which one. The South Carolina coast is the South Carolina coast in most photographs. There is a man standing in shallow water and a small child beside him, both looking at the camera. The man is young, younger than I am now, with dark hair and a wide smile and the easy stance of someone comfortable in his body. The child is me at 3, round-cheeked and serious, the expression I am told I had at 3 that made people think I was older than I was. We are standing in the same water. Our hands are connected. He is holding my hand or I'm holding his. It is the kind of photograph where you cannot tell who initiated the holding, which is as it should be. I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I put it in a frame, a simple one, wooden, the kind I have on my desk at work. I put it next to the pen cup, which is full of blue pens. My father on one side and the faded photograph on a beach I cannot identify. The blue pens on the other. The specific and good feeling in the space between them. He loved me. Something specific and good. Still, there is one more thing I want to say, which is about the map. I told you at the beginning that I had been navigating with a wrong map for 28 years. I want to tell you what happens when you get the right map, because it is not what I expected it to be, and I think it is worth describing honestly. Getting the right map does not undo the navigation you did with the wrong one. The territory you covered with the wrong map is still covered. You still went those places, made those decisions, built those things. The wrong map produced a real life, full of real things, Patricia, and the library, and the books and the evenings and the blue pens, and the specific careful person I became in the specific careful work of growing up without the father I thought had left. These things are mine. They do not become less mine because the map was wrong. What the right map does is change how you understand the territory you covered. The cautiousness in relationships, the watchfulness, the holding people at slight distances, I understand now as the reasonable response to a map that said people who are supposed to stay sometimes don't. The map was wrong about my father. The response to the map was not unreasonable given the map. I can hold this complexity without requiring it to resolve cleanly. The right map also shows you the territory you did not know was there. The territory of a father who wrote 48 letters. The territory of Eleanor keeping them carefully. The territory of a man at a fall festival who stood and watched his daughter laugh and then went to his car and sat there and then drove home. These places existed all along. I was navigating elsewhere, without knowing they were there. Now I know. I navigate with the right map now. I'm still learning its features. Some places I have been before, seen in new light. Some places I'm discovering for the first time. The discovery is ongoing, and it is, more than anything else, interesting. I am interested in who I am with this map. I'm interested in who I am still becoming. He had a feeling about me. Something specific and good. He was right to have it, not because I am anything extraordinary, but because I am his daughter. And because daughters carry their fathers with them in ways they do not always know until they find a box in a storage room, and read 48 letters, and discover the carrying has been happening all along. I carry him, I always have, I always will. Love, Dad. Still, I called Patricia last week and told her about the photograph. She said, "Send me a picture of it." I took a photograph of the photograph on my desk, the frame, the pen cup, the blue pens beside them, and I sent it to her. She called back in 3 minutes. She said, "Diana, he looks just like you." I said, "I know." She said, "The eyes." I said, "I know." She said, "You've been walking around with his face your whole life." I said, "Apparently." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He would have been so proud of you." I said, "He had a feeling about me. He said so, something specific and good." She said, "He was right. He was right." I'm 36 years old and I'm a librarian, and I read in the evenings in the chair by the window, and I carry 48 letters in an archival box on my shelf and a photograph in a frame on my desk and a blue pen always within reach. I am the daughter of a man who wrote faithfully to a child who could not answer, who kept writing because writing was what love required, who died in May with one more letter unmailed and the next month's already beginning in his head. I am the thing he had a feeling about, something specific and good. I was not abandoned. I was loved by someone who could only love me from a distance, who found the form available to him and used it every month, who trusted his mother to keep what he sent and who was right to trust her. I was loved. I have always been loved. The love has been in a box on a shelf for 28 years waiting for the right Saturday in March. I found it. I'm holding it. I will hold it for the rest of my life. Go through the things carefully, all of it. You might find someone waiting to tell you something true. If someone gave you a story about yourself that turned out to be incomplete, hear this. The full story exists. It may be in a box in a storage room on the third shelf from the bottom, behind the dishes and the fabric scraps. It may find you another way. But the full story exists, and it is different from the map you were given. And when you find it, it will change what you know about yourself in the way that real knowledge changes things, quietly, permanently, down to the bone. Go through the things carefully, all of it. You might find something that changes everything. Drop one word in the comments that describes how this story made you feel. Just one word. Tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.